All right, all right, all right. In the words of Matthew McConaughey, my name is Katherine Mitchell, and I am doing a video presentation spotlighting the 2014 Sony Pictures releasing hacking. I'm calling my presentation The Big Picture. This is for class band 708 for UNR module presentation 12. This is a topic that is interesting to me because I used to work for Sony Pictures Releasing from the year 2006 to 2012. So I left right before this hacking, but I did receive a bunch of emails during this time. And it's very interesting because though in that top upper right hand corner were the gates and getting into one of the entrances of getting onto the studio. And I went through those gates every day, twice a day for many years. So this has been a fun one for me. So a good place to start is to talk about how Sony is set up as a company. I used to work under the Sony Pictures releasing arm, which is underneath the movies, television, and that and more of the entertainment side. Sony itself also had an electronic side, had a music side, had all these different other entities of production. We had, and physically I worked on the studio where all of these productions were happening as well. So there was a lot of facets to Sony that shared other internal resources such as legal. We would have in Sony Pictures Releasing in our little area, we would have our own lawyers, but then there would be the corporate lawyers for the entire company in general. So I was director of worldwide non-theatrical and repertory sales, and if I had an issue that had something to do that was outside of the scope of the worldwide, out of the Sony Pictures Releasing area, then I would engage our corporate lawyers. The one reason I wanted to bring this up was because it's important to know the preventative measures that were in place prior to their big hacking of 2014, but they did also have a hacking in 2011 in the electronics area with their PlayStation network, in which the network for PlayStation was actually down and for weeks and exposed over 77 million consumers' personal information and credit card details. What I wanted to bring up here as a personal reference as an employee during that time is that I was reading this information about the PlayStation Network outage as almost like as if I was a consumer, receiving very little of that knowledge as an internal employee, being we felt so disconnected from the electronics, being we were over in the movie area. So I thought that was something interesting to bring up from a personal reference, being that there were already cyber breaches happening, but from a person and an employee that was working in a different area that didn't experience that breach in 2011, it really didn't alter any business, and business was the same as usual after those attacks. And I can see where we were still probably pretty vulnerable if to the 2014 attack, being how knowing how they reacted to the 2011 attack. All right, breach detections, prioritizing cyber attacks and prevention tactics to minimize the spread. In terms of Sony apparently had two malicious emails that were sent to Amy Pascal and to Michael Linton that they missed, maybe went to their junk email box, whatever the case was. Shows that those two employees, who are high-profile employees, were not very much monitored, or safeguards around their assets were not very much taken seriously. So when a threat does happen, you do need to take it seriously. It sounded like from the breakdown of the days that went into the Sony Pictures hacking that it was slow, but they did end up turning off their entire computer network infrastructure, which is a way to limit the additional damage by just stopping traffic. It's as they discovered how much of the information was infiltrated into, it was discovered that the hackers were able to get into the Sony router switches and change administrative usernames and passwords. So they definitely could have altered and edited systems. So the takeaway here, according to the research that I found from Rupert Dillon, PhD, on what to do before and after cybersecurity, is survey the damage, attempt to limit additional damage, record the details, engage law enforcement. And in terms of the Sony Pictures hacking, the group called themselves the GOP, and they were definitely intending on inflicting damage, brand damage to the company, as it was said to be North Korea and their upset, how upset they were about the movie The Interview. So preventative measures, technically and non-technically, play an important role in how to avoid potential attacks. It's not even so much avoid them as much as, mitigate the damage that they do if one does happen. So there needs to be an executive buy-in, top down. Everybody needs from the president down to the every person needs to understand the importance of cybersecurity, the physical security, including the physical security of the location in which these assets also live. So executive buy-in, everybody has to adopt into it in order for it to work successfully and fluidly. Fully understand your risk profile. So denial is not a river in Egypt. You have got to take a serious look at your systems, however that may be. Get it tested, top-down approach, up and down. In terms of Sony, it sounded like Clear Price Waterhouse did do an audit on them, found quite a few vulnerabilities in systems. Just knowing personally as an employee in the systems that I worked on, it was very minimal. We were never forced to change passwords. There was the only time we had interaction with IT in my limited area was either if we had to engage them because something wasn't right in our system. It was never for a proactive cybersecurity type training, etc. So on to the next one, policy enforcement and training. So we did have a lot of training in other areas when it came to studio interactions, etc. But when it came to the cybersecurity as an employee leading up to this time, I did not receive very much to my knowledge or to my remembrance. So policy enforcement and training, implementing those things from the get-go. Hopefully now with that 2014 hacking, they've had plenty of time to insert much more policy enforcement, knowing how they were in the past with it came to training. I'm sure that they're back on top of that. Employee screening, definitely as we get more sophisticated in digital literacy, I'm sure HR departments are going to need to be more sophisticated when it comes to employee screening, and look for things that they need to be looking for, and that red flags come up for whatever threats they deem. Offline backup and critical data, absolutely finding backup and ways to back up your critical data. I worked for the studio when we had a lot of hard assets like 35 millimeter, physical assets like 35 millimeter films that would have to be stored, not data files. So for the movie, so backups to hard copies of 35 millimeter films. There's only so many copies of Lawrence of Arabia in 35 millimeter, etc. So digital was a complete game changer, and is definitely, there's no reason in a digital world not to have backup of such critical data. And to invest intelligently in security, absolutely, that needs to be a budget item for businesses, not just corporations, across the board. Think about your security and invest in it wisely, according to your needs. But that's something that is a great takeaway from Sony Pictures. And then you keep your systems updated. That's a tale as old as time, as with all of these data breaches. That is a commonality. You need to keep the systems updated. All right, response team and cyber attack training. So the cyber attack has happened. We need to form the response team, get together. You have to have your senior executive management, your incident managers. You need your other department leads, your technical leads. You need your investigators, your analysts, your IT and infrastructure. It's all hands on deck when it comes to a breach. You need to have that communication fluid, flowing. Also, if you'll see the optional in this little chart that I added to this slide, you can have government and law enforcement. In the case of Sony Pictures, they did have the FBI come in and help navigate the investigation. There's also crisis management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. Of course, when it comes to Hollywood, the PR departments are going a buzzing. So especially with the data and information that was being leaked from Sony Pictures and the emails, it was such a brand. They were going after the brand and specifically the players, Amy Pascal and Steve Moscow, etc., and the producer Rudin. So when it comes to training and preparation, I put a slide up here comparing blue teams, purple and red teams in cybersecurity. Basically, you want to, if for Sony Pictures to get better, it would be a recommendation that they start doing exercises and they start planning for any kinds of these scenarios, whether it be from foreign attacks like North Korea coming in, threatening their movies and telling and trying to strong arm them from doing releases, to people coming in to stealing information down to credit cards or employees' information like their social securities, etc. So you need a blue team, which is the defenders, and you need the red team, that's the attackers, and the purple team that's in the middle. And just go for it and deploy and see where your vulnerabilities are and take it like a team and fix it, and get stronger. And I think those are the ways to start training for and preparing for cyber attacks. So accountability, crisis communication plan, communication dissemination, cyber attack decision team. So you need to notify those who are affected. You'll see on this screen, there's a sample of a letter that was sent out to the Sony Pictures Home Entertainment employees. I tried to find my letter, but I couldn't find it. But that they sent me at the time of the breach, informing me of what was going on and offering me the resolution of some data monitoring, etc. So again, you need to take accountability in these cyber breaches. In this case, the people who were most affected were the employees. They were exposed. Their records and previous employees were exposed, and that was not cool for them, and they should have some expectation of safety and privacy of their information from a company as large as Sony Pictures, or just any company in general. So they need to notify those, and the company itself needs to hold themselves accountable to their employees and the people that were affected. I did add one little chart in here that was part of how to deal with the data breach paper that I mentioned earlier, and one of the suggestions was to do system scans on a continuous basis. So again, it came up with those steps in making sure that you are always looking and scanning your systems, and employees are also staying alert, etc. All right, lessons learned. Hindsight is 2020. So what did we learn from this? Every failure needs to have some lessons here. So the breach did expose some areas of vulnerability in which Sony Pictures needs to adjust and look to. So in the paper that I've been referencing, when it comes to what to do before and after a cybersecurity breach, their recommendations are to shift from remediation to prevention. Again, starting those exercises, looking for vulnerabilities, creating plans, anticipating any of these kinds of attacks, and making yourself stronger as well as prepared for when those happen, so you can minimize as much damage as possible. In my department, I built 2 websites, so now knowing a little bit more back then when I worked for them, had gone through a 2014 experience, I know that we would be taking a look at those websites absolutely, and seeing what kind of information should we be securing more, etc. I know there was levels of logins, etc., of who we wanted to get in, but was there other layers that we should be implementing into those internally and driven websites that we used with our vendors, etc. So there's auditing and monitoring, business continuity plan for the cybersecurity integration, focus on employees, teach the employees, have them buy in, training. Another thing that I thought was interesting from that paper was to pay attention to personal devices. I know some companies that won't even let you bring in your personal devices, etc., etc. So I know that there's lots of different levels, but the personal devices are an area, a smart device going into smart devices. So another areas of levels that IT departments and infrastructure need to consider when employees are people are engaging with their systems. So to learn from the breach, document all the mistakes, assess how the mistakes could have been avoided, ensure training programs are incorporated to be learned from, also implementing clear access rules, looking at your employees, what kind of information do they need access to, and give them as little as information as necessary in order to get their job done, etc. Go through review and reporting processes, and make sure that when our employees are onboarded or offboarded, that they're absolutely offboarded, etc., from these systems. So those are just a few steps of things to learn, and lessons learned, and get back to business as normal, but with a nod to prevention and paying attention to proactively secure your systems going forward. And these are my references for the presentation that on Sony Pictures Releasing. I hope you enjoyed it. Sony Pictures Releasing was a fabulous company to work for. If you ever have an opportunity to have employment with them, I highly recommend it. And I just really enjoyed the many years that I was working at that studio. And it's unfortunate that they did have such a breach, but knowing them and the resilience as a company, I'm sure that they have bounced back better than ever, and they have a great team under their arms that are totally capable.